Have you ever found yourself wondering if you gave your children everything that really matters? Maybe you worked hard, sacrificed, put food on the table, provided an education, and even some luxuries. But even so, you still ask yourself, did I do enough? This silent doubt accompanies many parents who are now in their 50s, 60s, or 70s. It's not their fault. It's out of love. It's because they want to understand, now with more maturity, what really shapes a human being. What really forms a child's character, courage, and emotional health. Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, spent his life studying this. For him, childhood was not just a phase. It was the foundation on which all adult life would be built. His words are powerful. The emotional experience of the child is the invisible mold of its entire future psyche. But it's not just about obvious trauma or abuse. Freud devoted himself to investigating what we now call subtle wounds of the soul, those that leave no physical marks but echo for decades in behavior, relationships, and the way we love and exist in the world. The question he invites us to ask is simple but devastating. Did I see my child as he really was, or did I project onto him everything I wanted to be? That is where the problem lies. Many parents, without realizing it, try to mold their children to correct their own frustrations. They want their children to have the career they didn't have, the behavior they wish they had, the life they think would have been better. But in this attempt to get it right, they end up suffocating what is most essential, their child's identity. Freud said that one of the greatest pains of adulthood is having been loved conditionally as a child. This means that you only felt accepted when you pleased others, when you obeyed, when you lived up to expectations. Love came with demands, with expectations, with comparisons, and contrary to what many people think, this does not strengthen. It sickens. And the most dangerous thing is that this way of loving often comes disguised as zeal. Parents say they want the best for their children. But if that best is just a reflection of their own unfulfilled desires, what they are giving is not love, it is projection. In this video, we're going to talk about the only thing every child needs to receive from their parents to become an emotionally healthy adult. And this thing is not a gift, nor an inheritance, nor a magic formula. It is something invisible to the eye but fundamental to the heart, to be recognized as a person, not as a project. Freud believed that if parents simply give this genuine emotional foundation, their children will do well, even in the face of life's challenges. Because growing up with recognition and acceptance is the greatest shield against psychological suffering. Throughout this video, we will explore 7 pillars that arise from this one essential gift. We will understand how comparison destroys, how emotional absence weighs more than physical absence, and how love, when mixed with guilt or demands, can become a prison. If you have already raised your children, this video is not about regret. It is about awareness. It is about seeing now with the lens of time what may not have been so clear before. And more importantly, it is about knowing that there is still time. Time to repair, talk, welcome, and heal. Because, as Freud said, what is not brought to consciousness returns as fate. If you want to understand what really shapes a child, inside, and what can be done when this was not provided in childhood, stay until the end. Because you may discover that the greatest gift is not in the past. It can still be given now. When we talk about parental love, most people believe that it is impossible to go wrong if there is love. If I loved, then everything is fine, they think. But Freud teaches us that this is not quite true. Love alone does not guarantee emotional health. The problem is not in loving, it is in how we love. Freud said that parents do not love their children for who they really are, but for what they represent. A continuation of themselves, the fulfillment of unfulfilled dreams, an extension of their own identity. That is why many children grow up, not as they are, but as they believe they should be in order to receive affection. Loving too much can be as harmful as loving too little. Because loving too much in the Freudian context is not an excess of affection, but an absence of healthy boundaries. It is love that invades, suffocates, and projects. Parents who try to protect their children from all suffering end up preventing them from developing resilience, Parents who never say no raise children who are unable to deal with frustration, and the opposite is also true. Loving too little, when affection is scarce, when presence is cold, when emotional touch is absent, leaves deep scars. Freud observed that children who do not feel seen or valued emotionally tend to form psychological defense mechanisms that manifest in adulthood as low self-esteem, compulsions, or fear of abandonment. There is, therefore, a balance that is almost never achieved. Because this balance requires awareness, it requires that the father or mother see themselves first. Freud said that you can only truly love a child when you are at peace with your own history. This means that many of the mistakes made in raising children have less to do with intention and more to do with the unconscious repetition of unresolved family patterns. Parents who were neglected tend to neglect. Parents who were smothered may repeat this smothering, thinking it is care, and that's where the danger lies. When love is offered in a distorted way, it ceases to be nurturing and becomes controlling, demanding, conditional. The child grows up feeling that they need to fit into a mold to be accepted, and if they don't, they will feel like they have failed. To truly love a child, according to Freud, is to accept their individuality. It is allowing them to have their own desires, ideas that differ from yours, choices that you might never make. It is sustaining love, even when your child does not live up to your expectations. But few can do this, because in practice many parents feel rejected when their children do not follow the path they imagined for them. What they call disappointment is often the frustration of seeing a reflection in their children that is different from what they expected. Freud claimed that children realize from an early age the type of love they are receiving. They feel whether they are loved for who they are or for what they do. This perception shapes their entire personality structure. A child who feels they need to deserve love will grow up constantly seeking approval, whether at school, at work, or in their relationships. On the other hand, when love is given with maturity, with emotional presence, but also with firmness and respect for the other person's boundaries, that love builds an adult capable of loving and being loved in a healthy way. Therefore, the question that should be asked is not, did I love my child? But rather, how did I love my child? Under what conditions? With what expectations? With what needs involved? Recognizing that you have made mistakes in the way you love does not diminish the love that has been given. On the contrary, it is precisely this recognition that paves the way for a new way of relating, a freer, truer, more healing way. True love, as Freud reminds us, is not measured by how much you protect or how much you give. It is measured by the freedom it offers, the security it conveys, and the peace it leaves in the heart of the one who receives it. If you enjoy reflections like this, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any videos. When we talk about inheritance, most people think of material goods, houses, money, jewelry, property. But Freud shows us that there is a much deeper and more lasting inheritance that parents leave to their children, one that cannot be seen or counted, but that shapes an entire life. Emotional inheritance. This inheritance begins to be built in the first days of life through the way the child is welcomed, touched, and listened to. Freud called this initial bond the foundational phase of the psyche. It is there that the foundation is laid on which the child will build their identity. Most importantly, this construction does not depend on what is said, but on what is conveyed through attitudes, tone of voice, and consistent gestures. An emotionally absent father, even if physically present, can leave a legacy of insecurity. An overprotective mother may, without realizing it, leave a legacy of fear of the world. The curious thing is that as time goes by, many parents worry more about what they will leave behind in terms of material possessions, a house, a car, savings, and forget what they are already leaving behind every day, the way they make their children feel inside. Freud observed that what children absorb emotionally from their parents remains alive, even when their parents are no longer present. The way a father looked, the way a mother reacted to crying, the silence in the face of pain, the veiled demands, all of this becomes internal voices that will accompany children throughout their lives. This emotional inheritance defines what a child believes they deserve. If they grew up hearing that they were inadequate, they will carry that feeling into their relationships. If they were praised only when they obeyed, they will feel guilty whenever they say no. If they were ignored when they cried, they will learn to repress their emotions to the point where they become symptoms. That is why Freud was categorical in stating that childhood is destiny. Not because it determines everything forever, but because it becomes the unconscious standard of reference. And what is unconscious tends to repeat itself until it is brought to light. Many adults today experience conflicts they do not understand. Fear of abandonment, difficulty trusting, a constant need to prove their worth. And the root of this, almost always, lies in the emotional legacy they received without realizing it. But this legacy is not just a burden. When the bond was healthy, even with mistakes, and there was presence, listening, and respect, it becomes a powerful emotional asset. The child grows up with an inner sense of security, self-worth, and the ability to face the world. Parents who know how to recognize their children's feelings, who validate their pain, who do not ridicule their emotions, are leaving an invisible but indestructible legacy. They are teaching their children to trust themselves, to know that they have value regardless of performance, and to feel that they belong in the world. Freud said that the greatest gift a parent can give a child is to help them feel whole inside. This only happens when children can experience their emotions without fear of rejection, when they can make mistakes without being shamed, when they can be different without losing their parents' love. This is the true inheritance. It cannot be lost, divided, or disputed. It is carried in the way we walk, in the way we love, in the choices we make in silence. And if you feel that you have left behind a bad emotional inheritance, know that it can still be transformed. Freud believed in the power of elaboration. The past cannot be erased, but it can be understood, named, reconfigured, and with that, new legacies can be planted, even if belatedly. Because in the end, children don't need perfect parents. They need parents who are human enough to recognize what they have given, and also what they have lacked. Freud studied childhood like few others, and throughout his writings one idea returns insistently. Every child needs, above all else, to be seen. It is not just about being physically present. It is about seeing your child as an autonomous individual with legitimate desires, fears, thoughts, and emotions. This, according to Freud, is what structures the psyche in a healthy way. But what usually happens in family relationships is the opposite. Instead of seeing their child as they are, many parents see them as they would like them to be. They try to mold them into an idealized version. And in doing so, they end up erasing the child's real identity. Freud called this parental narcissism, when the love offered to a child is conditional on the degree to which they meet their parents' expectations. The child is praised when they behave, when they get good grades, when they conform to the family model. But when they dare to be different, when they express something that makes them uncomfortable, they are scolded, ignored, or labeled as problematic. This creates a profound dilemma in the child's mind. They understand that in order to be loved, they need to adapt. They need to hide parts of themselves, stifle feelings, and lie to please others. Over time, they lose connection with their own essence. That is why Freud insisted that the only thing a child truly needs from their parents is to be recognized for who they are, and still be accepted and loved. This does not mean approving everything. It does not mean saying yes to any behavior. It just means that even in moments of conflict, the child knows that they will continue to be seen as someone worthy of love. The impact of this on adult life is immense. A child who has been accepted entirely becomes a more secure adult, more creative, more capable of forming healthy bonds. They don't try to fit in at all costs, because they learned early on that their value does not depend on the approval of others. On the other hand, a child who grew up being molded all the time, who received love with conditions and demands, tends to become an anxious, insecure adult, often sabotaging themselves. They don't know exactly who they are, because they spent their lives trying to be what others expected them to be. Freud saw this clearly. For him, the root of many emotional disorders lay in this early break with one's own identity. When the love received depends on performance, the individual learns to lie to themselves and to build a life based on appearances. That is why when looking at their children, especially now that they are grown up. The most honest question a parent can ask is not, "What did I give him?" but "Did I really see him? Did I allow him to be who he is?" Because what really remains what sustains a child throughout life is this emotional memory of having been welcomed, of having cried and not been ridiculed, of having said something strange and not been corrected immediately, of having felt afraid and been listened to and not hurriedly told to shut up. If you gave this to your child, even if you made mistakes in other areas, rest assured, you gave them the most solid foundation anyone can receive. And if you didn't, if you realize today that you failed in this delivery, awareness is already a new beginning, because the child who once existed still lives within the adult. And when a father or mother, even after years, recognizes this absence and sets out to truly see, something changes. This is the only thing every child needs, and the hardest thing to offer. Because to see the other, you first need to have the courage to look at yourself. Among all the silent mistakes made in raising children, there is one that Freud viewed with particular attention: comparison. It does not scream, it does not hurt immediately, but it corrodes the child's identity, slowly and deeply. The phrase may seem harmless: "Your brother has always been more responsible," or "At your age I was already working." But these words, repeated throughout childhood, create an invisible wound that Freud classified as narcissistic trauma. Behind comparison is the desire to correct, to encourage, to show a model of behavior. The problem is that children do not interpret this intention. They only absorb the implicit message, "I am not good enough." And this feeling of inadequacy becomes embedded in the unconscious. Children begin to see themselves as flawed. They do not understand why they cannot please others and start to constantly measure themselves against external standards. The result, according to Freud, is a weakening of the ego. The child stops trusting their own perception, their natural impulses, their authentic desires. They learn to mold themselves to feel loved, or at least tolerated. Freud warns us that comparing siblings is one of the cruelest ways to create rivalry and resentment. Even if it is not intentional, the child feels that they are in a competition they can never win, because the criteria are arbitrary, because the other will always be better in some way. Many adults who today struggle with envy, low self-esteem, or excessive perfectionism were children who were compared, criticized, and silently belittled. And the cruelest thing is that, as they grow up, they become their own tormentors. They continue to compare themselves to colleagues, neighbors, family members, as if they were living in an eternal internal court where they are never good enough. Freud described this process as introjection of the critical figure. The voice that once came from parents now lives within the individual, and it does not silence itself. It is present in every attempt to start over, in every new relationship, in every desire for change. The effect of comparison is not only emotional, it directly interferes with the construction of identity. Children who are constantly compared begin to doubt who they are, their choices, and their ability to be loved for who they really are. And when these children become adults, they carry a void with them. They don't know exactly what they want because they have never been able to desire without fear. They feel inadequate, out of place, and often indebted to others. But the most important thing Freud teaches us is that no comparison is neutral. Whenever a child is compared, they are diminished. They are no longer seen in their uniqueness and are measured by a yardstick that is not theirs. True love, the kind that builds, is the kind that recognizes differences without creating hierarchies. It is the kind that realizes that each child has their own time, their own sensitivity, their own way of learning and expressing themselves. Comparison does not teach. It oppresses, it does not inspire, it diminishes. If you as a parent have used this tactic throughout your life, perhaps on impulse or by imitating your own parents, know this: there is still time to rebuild that bridge. Recognizing your mistake is already a powerful step. Telling your child, even if they are an adult, "Today I understand that you were different and that was not a flaw," can be the beginning of healing. Because deep down, every child wants to hear only one thing: that they were loved for being exactly who they are, and not for trying to be someone they could never be. Freud claimed that emotional absence is one of the most painful experiences of childhood. And the most paradoxical, it can occur even when parents are physically present. Being at home is not the same as being available. Children notice when their father is distracted, when their mother listens without hearing, when their presence in the room does not translate into presence in the heart. Many adults who today feel ignored or invisible in their relationships were children who were not really seen. Freud called this covert emotional absence, a subtle form of emotional neglect. This does not mean that parents did not love their children. Often they were just overwhelmed, lost in their own pain, trying to survive their routines. But for the child, the feeling is different. They cannot interpret contexts, they just feel. And what they feel is abandonment. The silence in times of pain, the rush to answer a question, the look that passes over them as if they weren't there. All of this leaves deep scars. These are small scenes that, when repeated, build an internal world where affection always seems absent or insufficient. Freud observed that children who grow up without being truly listened to tend to develop chronic emotional deficiencies. They seek approval, affection, and recognition everywhere, except in themselves. This emotional absence also shapes adults who have difficulty trusting others. After all, how can you trust someone if those who should have been your safe haven were distant, cold, or overly busy? Children learn that even when someone is close, they may not be available. This learning turns into constant vigilance, fear of opening up, and emotional barriers. It is common to see adults who feel lonely even when they are accompanied. This is not a personality defect. It is the consequence of a childhood in which loneliness was the only constant presence. Freud emphasized that human beings need emotionally attuned responses from an early age, an attentive look when they cry, a word that acknowledges their frustration, a hug that not only comforts but communicates, "I am here with you." When this is lacking, an inner void develops, and this void tries to be filled throughout life through unbalanced relationships, excessive consumption, and a relentless search for acceptance. The cruelest thing about emotional absence is that it cannot be easily claimed. Unlike verbal or physical aggression, it leaves no evidence. It is a silent pain that children themselves have difficulty naming. They simply grow up with a vague feeling of emptiness, disconnection, and lack of belonging. Many parents are shocked to hear from their adult children that they felt lonely as children. "But I was always at home," they say. Yes, they were. But they were not present in the way that the child needed. Freud taught that it takes more than physical presence. It takes involvement, emotional participation, genuine interest. And that doesn't require excessive time or grand gestures. Sometimes, all it takes is a few minutes of genuine attention, listening without judgment, validation without rushing. If you recognize today that you were not able to be present as you would have liked, that is not a sentence. Absence can be replaced by real presence now. An honest conversation, an apology, an act of attention. These are all possible ways to rebuild a bond that seemed lost. Because what heals most, as Freud said, is not what has happened, but what can still be done from what has been understood. And every child, deep down, wants this, to feel that, even with delays and failures, affection can still be felt. Among the most complex feelings in the parent-child relationship is what Freud called introjected guilt, a silent form of emotional imprisonment that begins in childhood but can last a lifetime. It all starts with the intention to love. Many parents offer the best they have, give up their dreams, work beyond their limits, endure hardships. They do this out of love, but over time, if this love is not well understood and managed, it can turn into disguised demands. Phrases such as, "After everything I've done for you," or "You are my only reason for living," or "Even if it weren't for you, my life would have been different," seem at first glance to be statements of sacrifice. But Freud warns us, behind these phrases lies a way of demanding that the child live with emotional debt. The child grows up feeling that they need to reciprocate, compensate, and balance the scales. And that is not love. That is love conditioned on reciprocity. Freud observed in many of his patients that the most emotionally repressed adults were those who had carried this guilt from an early age. They couldn't get away from their families, couldn't make important decisions, didn't dare to follow their own paths for fear of hurting those who raised them. This type of bond, instead of liberating, imprisons. The child does not feel free to make mistakes, to walk away, to disagree. They live according to their parents' expectations and confuse obedience with affection. Individuality is lost, and love becomes a burden. Freud called this neurotic love, where affection is not given freely but comes with conditions, rules, and emotional debts. It is a type of love that does not welcome but watches over, that does not accompany but controls, that does not inspire but imprisons. For children, this environment creates confusion. How can you love someone who also makes you feel constantly indebted? How can you trust a bond that demands, weighs heavily, and constantly reminds you of how much it cost? In adulthood, this pattern creates similar relationships. Children who grow up under this guilty love tend to repeat this logic in their own relationships. They sacrifice too much, accept too little, nullify themselves, avoid conflict at all costs. And often, they demand from others the same silent loyalty that was once demanded of them. The truth is that for Freud, love only fulfills its role when it is a source of freedom, not obligation. Loving a child is preparing the ground for them to leave, not to stay. It is sustaining a bond that does not require constant presence or eternal gratitude, but is based on the confidence that what has been given remains, even at a distance. Many parents confuse gratitude with obedience. They expect their children to act as extensions of their will, to repeat their choices, to sacrifice their desires in the name of supposed family loyalty. But as Freud reminds us, true loyalty only arises when there is freedom to leave without guilt. If you look back today and recognize that you used love as a way of demanding something in return, even if you didn't realize it, know that it is possible to change that. A sincere apology, a gesture of emotional release, a phrase spoken with an open heart, such as, "You owe me nothing," can heal decades of silent guilt. And if you are the child who grew up under this weight, know this too. The love that binds you is not your obligation to maintain. You can, with respect and clarity, say that you want to love without guilt, that you want to be present without losing yourself, and that you no longer want to live to pay a debt that was never yours. Because true love, as Freud taught, demands nothing in return. It offers space for the other to be and to remain whole. Perhaps you have recognized yourself in parts of this journey. Perhaps you have revisited gestures, words, silences, moments when you thought you were doing your best. But now, with a more mature outlook, you realize that something was missing. This realization can hurt, but Freud said that the pain of consciousness is infinitely less than the pain of unconscious repetition. In other words, recognizing flaws is not a punishment. It is a path to liberation. The great tragedy is not making mistakes with your children. The real tragedy is remaining trapped in pride, in the fear of admitting, in the idea that what's done is done. Because, as Freud taught us, the past does not disappear. It repeats itself, hides, transforms into symptoms. But there is something powerful you need to know. Emotional repair is possible, no matter how many years have passed. A child, even an adult, can be deeply moved to hear from the lips of a father or mother. Today I understand. Today I see. I'm sorry for what I couldn't give you. These words do not erase what has been done, but they open space for something new. They dissolve guilt, soften resentment, and build bridges where there was once distance. Freud believed that the unconscious recognizes sincere gestures. Even when the relationship seems distant or worn out, there is a part of the child that still wants to be seen, welcomed, accepted. Even if they don't say it, even if they deny it, even if they seem indifferent. If you haven't had the chance to offer your children the unconditional recognition that Freud considered essential, there is still time to start. A conversation can be the beginning. A different look, a hug without demands, listening without judgment. Small acts have immense power when they are loaded with truth. And if contact is no longer possible, because your child has drifted away or is no longer with you, you can still make that move internally. Write, reflect, speak out loud. Make peace with the part of you that tried to do right, but didn't know. How? Because deep down, every father and mother carries within themselves the desire to have done their best. And they almost always did the best they could, with the resources they had, with the pain they carried, with the models they inherited. The question is not to judge what has been done, but to decide what can still be built from it. Freud also reminded us that no human relationship is definitive. Everything can be transformed, but it takes a willingness to look, to feel, to embrace difficult truths. The good news is that children, even when hurt, do not forget sincere gestures of love. They may not be able to say anything at the moment. They may react with coldness, with resistance. But the seed of reconnection is planted, and over time it germinates. At the end of this reflection, the question that remains is not, "What did I do wrong?" The most powerful question is, "What can I offer now with the awareness I have today?" That answer is yours, and it may be simpler than it seems. Maybe it's a phone call, an "I love you" said without haste. A "tell me how you are" that comes from the heart. "I don't want to change you anymore. I just want to understand you." Or maybe it's just the silence of someone who finally understands that loving is not molding the other person. It's allowing them to exist fully, and that, after all, is the only thing a child needs. If this reflection made sense to you, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to receive more reflections like this. That way you won't miss any new content. Take care and see you next time.